During the Second World War, tanks became a symbol of modern warfare. Thunderous machines with guns could change the course of battles. Yet an enemy no less important than hostile anti-tank guns was the climate itself. On the Eastern Front, temperatures dropped to 40 degrees. In the West, the harsh winter of 1944–45 turned the Ardennes and the Dutch marshes into a frozen wasteland. Among crews, stories circulated about how not only human skin froze, but also the oil in engines and the hydraulic systems of the guns. In this video, you'll learn how tankers in the cold winter months dealt not only with deadly shells, but also with the daily challenges of frost, snow, and wind. In the early years of the war, tank designers had little experience with extreme temperatures. The initial models were created for the battlefields of France and Poland, not for Siberian plains or Alpine passes. Drivers and mechanics had to improvise quickly. While one crewman checked the oil, another tried to free up frozen tracks. Back then, military schools taught future tankers combat tactics, not how to recognize the onset of frost by the brittleness of rubber seals. Gradually, it became clear that winter had many faces. Sometimes it was a minor nuisance, rime on optics. Sometimes it was a harsh judge that decided whether a vehicle would move or remain stuck in place. The opening shot could capture a tank in the middle of a snow-swept plain, a machine that looks invincible yet is helpless without human ingenuity and warmth. In the background, we might hear the hiss of steam and the clatter of an engine, while the narrator asks, "How did crews learn to survive in conditions that forgave no mistakes?" This will be a journey into the past, full of technical detail, personal stories, and natural patterns. To understand this, we must first become acquainted with the very environment in which tanks moved. The challenges of winter warfare varied by region. Northern Finland during the Winter War resembled a polar expedition, with tanks moving between frozen lakes and snow dunes. The Balkans or Central Europe presented different obstacles, wet snow and sleet that reduced visibility and made tracks slip. In this video, you'll see how different battlefields turned into laboratories of improvisation, and how a few simple principles evolved into procedures that still inspire modern armies. In a moment, we'll reveal how the cold affected tactics, logistics, and the personal lives of crews. In a moment, we'll also reveal how industrial designs turned into improvised homes on tracks. We will introduce cold-tempered crews from various warring armies and look at the combination of technical ingenuity, inventiveness, and camaraderie that kept them going. We won't focus only on cold engines, but on the people who spent entire days in these metal capsules. Eyewitness accounts and documentary photographs will let us peek into their world. In the light of archival footage, we learn that for tankers, combat was not only about firing and defense. Each frosty day became a test of survival. They had to figure out how to sleep, what to eat, and how to handle hygiene in a space of just a few square meters. Step inside an armored capsule in the dead of winter, where the temperature falls but resolve remains. The notion that tanks were invincible evaporated quickly during the first freezing winters. On the Eastern Front, the German army counted on a swift breakthrough, but the harsh reality of the Russian winter shattered its plans. On some days in 1941, columns stood motionless. Tank and automotive lubricants froze, and engines would not start. Gun recoil mechanisms froze as well. German command acknowledged that by November there were more frostbite cases in hospitals than combat wounds. The winter of 1941–42 became a true turning point. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June, advanced rapidly at first. But by autumn, the famous Russian Rasputitsa, the season of muddy roads, heralded an even worse catastrophe. When Operation Typhoon, the push on Moscow began in October, the enthusiasm of German tankers faded quickly. Mud turned to ice. Forward elements lacked winter clothing because supply lines prioritized ammunition and fuel. Meanwhile, the Soviets redeployed Siberian divisions in white padded greatcoats, trained for winter warfare. For tank crews, this meant facing a prepared opponent, while they themselves struggled with frost-bitten fingers. On the other side of Europe, in Belgium and Luxembourg, the Battle of the Bulge unfolded in the December days of 1944. Armored formations of the Allies and the Wehrmacht were caught in a swirl of snow, fog, and temperatures well below freezing. American and British tankers, who had mostly fought in summer conditions, had to improvise. They often got stuck in snow-filled valleys and could barely see a few meters ahead. One Sherman crew described how at night they had to clear the snow accumulating on the armored hull because the tank threatened to stop turning as the packed snow refroze. At the same time, they had to guard constantly against infiltrating infantry who could sneak up unseen in the snow. Farther north, in Finland, the Winter War of 1939 also provided lessons. Although this conflict preceded the global fighting, it became a lesson for later tankers. The Soviets sent light tanks onto frozen lakes that often broke through the ice. The Finns exploited frost and camouflage. Their ski troops avoided direct battle and focused on supply columns. Tankers who survived this experience later advised that the greatest enemy was poor planning. Without knowledge of the terrain and preparation for the cold, even strong tanks could be useless. Crews quickly realized that the battle with winter was continuous, beginning with preparation, continuing during combat, and not ending even afterward. Frostbite appears unnoticed. First fingers go numb, then blisters and black spots emerge. The cold also threatens dehydration. People drink less and lose fluid through faster breathing. Some tankers said the worst thing was not the frost itself, but the combination of exhaustion, fear, and confinement. In a moment, we'll reveal how these physical and psychological challenges shaped technical procedures and how crews learned to keep their machines moving. On the opposite side of the front, the Soviets drew on their cold climate experience. According to General Staff reports from January 1942, Russian soldiers wore padded greatcoats, felt boots, and fur hats. This gear reduced the risk of frostbite and allowed them to stay in the field longer. By contrast, the Germans in the first winters improvised, stuffing newspapers and straw under their uniforms to retain heat. The lack of proper clothing and differences in supply affected morale and the crew's ability to operate. On the Western Front in 1944, the Allied advance into Germany was halted by a combination of churned-up roads and sudden snowstorms. Dutch and Belgian villages turned into mud traps that bogged down tanks. Likewise, a British armored brigade fighting in the Ardennes had to solve the problem of snow freezing under the skirt armor of Matilda tanks. As one technical officer noted, compacted snow that refroze during movement could completely halt a tank. Under such conditions, crews learned that nature could be a worse enemy than an enemy shell. Our protagonists had to rely on simple tricks and modern inventions alike. Questions spun constantly in their minds. How do you start an engine at 30 degrees Celsius? Where do you find warm food when the vehicle can't leave its position? We'll look for answers in the next chapter, where we'll lift the veil on the secrets of keeping tanks operational. A tank's engine is the heart of the machine. In winter, however, this heart could easily seize. Many crews learned that the only way to prevent oil and fuel from freezing was to leave the engine running. On the Eastern Front, tankers often let engines idle all night, which required a continuous supply of fuel. The Soviet T-34 had the advantage of compressed air starting. Thanks to that, it could start even at 30 degrees Celsius, whereas German engines with conventional lubricants could not overcome the icy stiffness. This difference between the T-34's diesel and the German gasoline engines became the stuff of legend. Winter underscored the importance of proper lubricants. German units used standard oils that thickened at low temperatures, slowing crank rotation and draining batteries. Soviet engineers experimented with lighter-weight oils and added kerosene to blends to lower the pour point. When the situation became critical, mechanics heated oil over a fire or poured hot water over the engine. Logistics manuals recommended keeping oil drums in heated depots, but such facilities were often unavailable at the front. An exception were mobile heating plants mounted on trucks that could serve larger formations. Auxiliary starters became a key innovation. Some German vehicles had installed electric glow plug heaters and oil warmers, but their production complexity and power draw kept numbers low. In vehicles tied to the SLA-16 project for light machines, an added heating loop could warm the oil within minutes. Similarly, on the Soviet IS-2, a heating unit was installed into the gearbox. It used engine heat and allowed reverse airflow into the fighting compartment. This design not only eased starting, but provided basic crew heating. Crew practices varied with circumstance. Some used flame-type torches, like today's gasoline blow lamps, to heat the engine block. Elsewhere in the East, the ash baking method spread. Mechanics built a fire beside the tank, then laid an iron plate over the hot embers to conduct heat to the engine. Risky, but often the only option. Later, portable diesel generators were developed that produced hot air. This air was ducted by hose to the engine or into the cabin, a forerunner of today's independent heaters. Keeping engines running constantly had drawbacks. Higher fuel consumption meant tankers had to drive even in the worst conditions, risking ambush. A noisy engine could also betray a tank's position, so crews sometimes combined idling with other measures. Blankets were stretched around the engine bay to retain heat, and snow was piled over the engine cover from the outside as insulation. Exhaust was another problem. Exhaust that was too hot could melt snow and create mud that trapped the tank, so mechanics built snow berms around exhausts to diffuse heat and mask signatures. Charging batteries was yet another issue. Low temperatures cut capacity, and without electrical power, a tank cannot fire, let alone start. In the field, crews often swapped batteries between vehicles and used generators to recharge them. In some cases, jeeps and motorcycles were used to feed current to a starter via cables, an improvised jump start that became a routine part of winter operations. Engines also suffered from internal condensation. After long running, once shut down, vapor froze on the cylinder walls, forming ice crystals that could damage pistons. Experienced crews therefore tried to hand-crank the engine several turns after shutdown to clear condensate. The T-34's diesels faced another hazard. With rapid cooling, unburned diesel could ignite explosively, so Soviet tankers followed strict fueling procedures. By the end of this chapter, it's clear that winter mechanics mattered as much as tactics. Frosts forced armies to innovate and crews to persevere. In the next section, we'll see how crews took care of themselves and how they tried to turn an icy interior into a tolerable shelter. German designers, however, were also inspired by winter to improve. Within the SLA-16 effort, they created a heating loop that could warm engine oil in 1 to 2 minutes before start. The later heavy Soviet tank IS-2 incorporated engine heating equipment mounted in the gearbox and a special system for reverse airflow through the engine that could warm the fighting compartment. By day, crews often used a two-stroke auxiliary generator installed on M4 Shermans. U.S. manuals note that heat from this unit's exhaust served as an improvised heating system, and later versions even ducted hot air to the engine bay or directly into the crew compartment. When machinery failed, folk methods took over. Some Eastern Front crews lit charcoal or gasoline fires beneath the engine to thaw the oil, risky not only because of fire, but because smoke gave away positions and drew artillery. A German tanker named Ottokarius recalled in his memoirs that if the battery was healthy, a cold weather start wasn't a problem. But with a flat battery, the engine had to be warmed. He warned that setting a fire under a tank would attract the enemy, and he himself never did it. Other crews resorted to improvised technical fixes. Some advised adding a little gasoline to the oil to reduce viscosity. Others poured hot water over the engine block. Modern sources note that around 30 degrees exceed an engine should be started every 2 to 3 hours, or it will freeze. In wartime, however, there was rarely the time or fuel for such care, so crews often had to choose between the risk of overheating and a shutdown that could mean a deadly delay. Tellingly, technological adaptation went hand in hand with personal courage and inventiveness. Soviet tankers developed the habit of throwing a tarpaulin over the engine. Their Shermans, delivered under Lend-Lease, had two powerful ventilation turbines, which, while cooling the engine, brought more draft than warmth to the crew. As tanker Dmitry Fedorovich recalled, they had to drape a canvas over the engine to keep at least some heat in the interior. Then they slept right in the fighting compartment and grew fond of American fleece coveralls. Whether a heating loop or a simple canvas sheet, the goal of all these procedures was the same: keep the tank operational and themselves alive. While some mechanics fought frozen diesel, crews increasingly focused on their own comfort, a topic we explore next. After the technical tour, we move inside the tank. Once the crew closed the hatches, they entered another world, enclosed, metallic, dark. Historian James Holland notes in a National Army Museum program that the Sherman's interior was roomier than some other tanks, but it was still a place where a person constantly banged elbows and head. In summer months, it smelled of rubber, oil, and burnt cordite, mixed with sweat and urine. The tank was not only a machine, but also living room, dining room, and toilet. In winter, the conditions changed. From armored cauldron, it became a refrigerator. The tank's metal walls were both advantage and curse. In warmth, they served as a thermal reservoir. In winter, they acted like a fridge. As the crew breathed, water vapor condensed on the plates, forming tiny ice crystals. During movement, these crystals flaked off into fine snow that settled on equipment. Tankers soon learned they had to wipe down metal regularly to prevent corrosion of electrical contacts. Optics suffered too. Frozen periscopes limited view, and gunners would breathe on turret glass under a cloth to keep it from frosting over. Another danger was carbon monoxide. The engine or auxiliary generator burned gasoline or diesel, and fumes could seep into the sealed interior without proper ventilation. This silent killer forced crews to open hatches and air out the tank regularly, even if it meant letting in freezing air. Some tankers covered their mouths with cloth while airing to prevent frost-bitten lungs, and although fans were installed, they weren't always functional, and their noise wore crews down. Differences between tank types were significant. German Panthers and Tigers had partitions separating the fighting compartment from the engine, reducing heat flowing forward, an advantage in summer heat, but in winter it meant crews needed extra layers. Soviet T-34s had the engine right behind the turret. Heat spread forward more readily, but fire risk rose. British cruisers and Cromwells were built for speed, not comfort. Thinner armor let the cold in like a knife. American Shermans were sturdier and offered a bit more room, allowing storage of blankets and extra rations. Tankers created tiny homes inside metal machines, pinning family photos to turret walls, stashing chocolate behind seats, folding uniforms carefully so they wouldn't get in one another's way. In winter, they also brought heating stones or bottles of hot water warmed on the engine and used as improvised warmers. Candles played a role too. Beyond light, they gave off a little heat and helped reduce dampness. Of course, flames and fuel vapors were a dangerous mix, so candles sat on metal stands with someone always watching they didn't tip. A memorable anecdote comes from a British tanker's diary. One cold night, the crew decided to heat tea using a propellant charge from a gun round, placing the primer in a tin mug set on the hull floor. The blast was small, but the wave of heat felt like a fireplace for a few minutes. Such moments of ingenuity show how crews constantly sought ways to turn a metal shell into a livable space. Sleeping habits varied. Some swore they slept better inside, feeling safer from shelling and ready to react quickly. Others preferred sleeping under the tank to avoid fan noise and get fresh air. During the Ardennes fighting, some American crews even shoveled out snow nests, laying a tarp and blanket over the hollow. The snow insulated from wind, and the temperature inside was higher than outside. Next, we'll open the crew's wardrobes. What gear they wore, what materials they used, and why the right item could decide life and death. We'll also see how different armies tried to balance warmth and mobility. Reliable heating was scarce. Some British and American tankers used the auxiliary generator mentioned earlier for warmth early in the war, but interiors had virtually no proper heating systems. Crews therefore warmed themselves by idling the engine. If that wasn't enough, they turned toward the exhaust and wrapped up in blankets. Later, U.S. Sherman modifications introduced ducting to route exhaust heat directly into the interior. Sometimes these devices broke, or mechanics disconnected them to save space. Soviet crews thought more about comfort only on heavy tanks. The IS-2 introduced a reverse airflow system that could warm the fighting compartment by reusing engine heat. In practice, most tankers relied more on clothing and human contact. Soviet crews in severe cold pressed close together to share body heat and slept sitting on metal seats, propping one another. If they left the tank, it was usually briefly, to relieve themselves or cook. Hygiene was rudimentary. According to James Holland, British tankers used empty shell cases as improvised toilets and then tossed them out. Sleep happened either inside, warmed by the engine, or under the tank. Paradoxically, sleeping under the hull was safer than on the roof, though there was always a risk the tank might shift or sink. Crews used tarps and position straps to rig a kind of hammock between the tracks and engine bay. In the next chapter, we'll see how clothing and equipment helped crews endure winter, and how items were designed specifically for tankers. It was no accident that the winter of 1941 earned the nickname General Frost. To survive, tank crews had to rely on gear that insulated them from icy metal. Each army chose a strategy not only based on climate but on available materials. At the start of the war, German crews wore standard field gray greatcoats intended for infantry, adequate in extreme cold for foot soldiers, but they didn't provide enough insulation for tankers. After the brutal winter of 1941-42, the Army developed a four-piece M1942 winter suit, a short parka with hood and drawcord, insulated trousers, mittens, and a balaclava. The whole set was reversible, field gray on one side, white on the other for snow camouflage. It suited crews because it allowed better movement in cramped spaces while providing insulation. Soviet tankers wore various combinations of leather coats and trousers with sturdy boots. Sometimes they received long sheepskin coats, but few were available due to cost. Many crews got the quilted telegrajka set, light but warm, cotton-filled garments produced in black specifically for armored units. These jackets and trousers insulated without restricting movement in the turret. Some units received three-quarter sheepskin coats and insulated versions of leather tanker helmets. Thanks to that, crews could more easily endure long night watches over tanks that had to remain ready. The British initially relied on standard uniforms supplemented with leather jerkins or long greatcoats. The turning point came only in 1943 with the introduction of the legendary one-piece suit known as the pixie suit. As the museum description notes, it was a single garment with thick insulated lining and rubberized sections, with a double zipper from neck to ankles. The zippers could join the legs to create a sleeping bag. The suit had unusual pockets on the thighs and chest, so drivers and gunners could reach them while seated. A snap-on hood protected the head. When fully zipped, the wearer looked like a fairy tale creature, hence the nickname. Men and women alike appreciated that it was waterproof and allowed one to relieve oneself without undressing. Even so, many tankers recalled that with the pixie suit, hands and face still needed separate mitts and scarves to prevent frostbite. The U.S. Army issued its tankers the so-called tanker jacket, a short jacket with thick lining and a knit collar. Designed for harsh winter conditions, it provided thermal protection, and its popularity quickly spread beyond armored units. Paratroopers and pilots wore it because it was warm and didn't restrict movement. The second model added small improvements, such as sturdier zippers and reinforced cuffs. Beyond the jacket, U.S. crews in the USSR under Lend-Lease also received fleece coveralls that, according to Soviet tanker Dmitry Fedorovich, crews came to love. Gear reflected not only climate but economics. The Germans produced a functional suit only after the shocking winter of 1941-42. The Soviets relied on mass production of quilted garments. The British created an innovative suit that crews loved so much they wore it after the war. Clothing wasn't omnipotent, but it protected vital parts from frostbite and let crews focus on fighting. We should also mention accessories that mattered no less. Crews wore multiple underwear layers, a wool shirt as the base, then a sweater or light jacket, and only then the main winter suit. The Germans used combinations of striped puttees wrapped around the shins. The Soviets had separate arm warmers that insulated forearms. Mittens were often underestimated, but crucial for a tanker. A loader handling metal shells risked frostbite. German parkas included mitts that could be unfastened, so fingers could work the trigger or radio. The British paired the pixie suit with leather mitts with removable liners. Americans issued wool mitts that quickly got saturated with oil and lost effectiveness. Soviet tankers often used fur-lined mittens, bulky but durable. Footwear was critical. German crews wore leather boots that needed regular greasing to prevent drying and cracking. The Soviets used felt valenki that insulated even at extreme temperatures. British and American units wore leather boots with fur linings that, however, could soak through in wet snow. Crews therefore pulled cellophane bags over boots or added canvas overshoes. Some manuals even advised stuffing newspapers into boots to absorb moisture and add an insulating layer. An interesting element of the British pixie suit was the internal harness functioning as a rescue system. If a tank was hit, a comrade could pull the wounded out using the straps. Makers also considered pockets for ammo or maps, positioned not to interfere while seated. Soviet designers preferred simplicity. The Telegraphica had few pockets because crews kept most items in bags hung outside the tank. In logistics, distributing clothing was its own discipline. German units were often short of parkas and mitts because depots were stuck in Poland. The Soviets suffered shortages of quality footwear due to overloaded industry. British and American units could rely on mass production. Documents describe how some American units sent their older jackets to the Soviets through Lend-Lease. This flow of gear helped Soviet crews, who appreciated the warm lining of American coveralls. Even with good gear, crews faced daily questions: where to eat, how to wash, where to sleep. Such details were decisive for morale and combat effectiveness. Tanker life wasn't endless hours of fighting. It was mostly waiting, when basic human needs had to be met. In the cold, providing hot food was essential for morale. Crews had standard rations: canned goods, hardtack, tea, and coffee. British tankers, say, the Sherwood Rangers, drank black tea with carnation condensed milk, brewed on a small Primus stove right by the tank. Hands numb from handling metal warmed over the flame, and each sip brought welcome encouragement. James Holland notes that crews loaded canvas bags with extra food into tanks. Sometimes they even brought hens for eggs. Food wasn't only calories, it was a symbol of home. The smell of tinned stew reminded them of family kitchens, so soldiers often bartered ingredients: American chocolate for British tea, Soviet black bread for German hardtack. This unofficial gastro-barter boosted morale and friendship among Allied crews. Creativity flourished. Some baked buns on the engine deck. Others mixed canned tuna with beans to make improvised salads. Veteran accounts also mention water shortages. Water in cans froze, so tankers melted snow in metal pots. Melted snow, however, lacked minerals and led to fatigue, so some added salt or a piece of dried meat for electrolytes. Besides Primus stoves, small gasoline burners were set inside shell casings to shield the flame from wind. Coffee had a special place. American tankers often had access to strong GI coffee that kept them going on night watches. German crews made do with chicory substitutes, while Soviets drank sweet tea with jam. Among British crews, OXO, the meat broth cube drink, was popular, warming and strengthening. Brewing thus became a ritual for sharing news and strengthening bonds. Soviet tankers often got dry bread, salted fish, and porridge. When possible, they cooked outside in a pot while guarding the tank. In severe frosts, soup sometimes froze before they could finish it. To keep food warm, they set pots on the engine or exhaust, hot metal parts serving as an improvised stove. U.S. crews used flexible ration packets. To heat tins, they placed them near the engine. Some joked that the Sherman ran so hot their food warmed in minutes. During blizzards, however, they had to make do with cold meals and wait for calmer weather. Sleep was a luxury. Tankers had to be ready to roll at any time, so they slept in shifts. The pixie suit let the British zip the legs together into a sleeping bag so they could bed down on the hull floor or beneath the tank. Often they stretched a tarp over the vehicle to make a makeshift awning. Frozen ground was covered with branches and sticks to insulate from the snow. Sleep had a psychological aspect. Crews often slept in a chain, heads on each other's knees, sharing body heat. In some units, strict schedules were kept. 2 slept, 3 stood watch, rotating every 2 hours. It wasn't unusual for sleep to be shattered by explosions or flares. Tankers had to wake and react in seconds, requiring discipline and fitness. Sleeping conditions varied by type. Some vehicles had thin rubber mats on the floor for insulation. More often, the floor was bare metal. Crews used wooden crates, blankets, even burned out exhaust shrouds as improvised mattresses. In snowfall, ice formed on the roof. Before sleeping, crews scraped it to reduce weight and keep it from building up. When sleeping outside, they used residual engine heat. After shutdown, a tarp was thrown over the engine bulkhead and they lay on it, warmed by the remaining heat. Soviet crews in Shermans used the tarp that covered the engine. British and Americans added felt blankets and fur throws sourced from civilians or by barter. Soviets often slept seated inside, especially when watching the engine all night. Sometimes they built snow shelters near the tank. Fedorovich recalls his Sherman crew stretching a canvas over the engine bay to create a warmer bed. In exceptional cases, crews broke up wooden ammo boxes to build temporary beds. Some units even used inflatable rubber mattresses that could be quickly stowed. Still, most remember chattering teeth and aching backs from sleeping on metal. Hygiene was a major challenge. Water was scarce, and frost hindered washing. Crews brushed teeth with snow and wiped hands with rags. For relieving themselves, solutions were improvised. British tankers used empty shell cases as toilets and tossed them out. Elsewhere, crews dug a small pit behind the nearest bush. In battle, they sometimes had to urinate in a corner of the tank. Hygiene problems went beyond toilets. Wearing the same layers for long periods led to fungal and skin diseases. German crews saw cases of trench foot and frostbite complicated by infection. British and American crews tried to dry clothes over the engine and air them out, but constant operations left no time. Soviet crews often slept in the same clothes for weeks without washing, spreading lice. Even so, improvised hygiene existed. Crews used medical alcohol to disinfect hands, also easing psychological stress. Some mounted a bucket outside the tank as a wash basin, dropping a heated stone inside to keep water from freezing. Toothbrushes were carved from twigs. Crushed chalk powder stood in for paste. Primitive as they were, these measures helped morale. The feeling of cleanliness symbolized human dignity in inhuman conditions. Finally, psychological techniques mattered. Crews sang songs, recited poetry, or played word games to forget the cold. Some kept diaries describing not only combat, but the taste of tea or the color of the sky, records that offer historians a valuable window into daily life. Humor was a shield against fear. Jokes about frozen backsides or cartoonish sketches of friends warmed the atmosphere. Even facing death, tankers kept their humanity. They coined nicknames for their pixie suits, competed over who brewed the best tea, and traded jokes about cold feet. Humor helped them endure and reminded them that even in war, people remain people. Next, we'll look at the social and cultural differences among armies and how these shaped their approach to winter. For Soviets, tankers were, in political officers' eyes, heroic defenders of the motherland. During the Battle of Moscow in December 1941, temperatures plunged below 30 degrees Celsius. While German machines froze, Soviet T-34s, with diesel engines and compressed air starting, could start. Crews still faced shortages of food, shelter, and medical care. Many wore quilted telegraikas and valenki, cheap, mass-produced. Records show comradeship and collective spirit were key. Compared with other armies, clothing and tank heating were simpler, but emphasis fell on quick repair and movement. The political department issued brochures with basic anti-frost advice, warning against touching bare metal and reminding that fingers could stick. Crews developed improvised practices, tying warm rags to gun grips, rotating mittens every few minutes. The German army entered the USSR with the illusion the war would end before winter hit. Reality brought thousands of frostbite cases and even froze machinery. Complaints about lack of winter clothing were so frequent that command ordered redistribution of fur coats taken from civilians. After introducing the M1942 winter suit, crews finally received clothing that insulated and allowed better movement. Even so, many preferred improvisation, stuffing boots with straw, wrapping legs with newspapers, tying warm scarves around their necks. Morale was under pressure. Diaries note some units cut wooden insoles to avoid bare metal contact and played cards in spare moments to warm the mind. Still, winter's impact was devastating. Wehrmacht reports observed that by late November, hospitals held more soldiers for frostbite than gunshot wounds. The British entered continental Europe in 1944–45 with experience from Africa. Crews at first struggled with a lack of winter clothing, but after the pixie suit arrived, conditions improved. Logistics were another advantage. British and American supply lines delivered regular food, hot drinks, and medical supplies. British tankers took pride in their tea ritual. Every free minute was used to brew tea, a social glue that built crew unity and brought a brief taste of normal life. Many crews attached personal items to their tanks, photos, talismans, small charms, to remind them of home and bolster resilience. Americans enjoyed the edge of industrial capacity, gear, and fuel stocks. The tanker jacket kept crews warm while allowing movement in cramped quarters. Crews also often used an electric generator to warm batteries and provide residual heat. Still, they faced psychological challenges. Many tankers were recruited from cities and weren't used to extreme cold. Veterans tell how crews sang, played cards, and kept diaries to sustain morale. Winter combat in the Ardennes, especially the December 1944 offensive, showed that technological superiority isn't everything. Regardless of nationality, crew cohesion mattered most. In spaces where 3 to 5 people were together constantly, deep bonds formed, requiring absolute focus and trust. As James Holland notes, a tank was home, workplace, bedroom, and shelter, demanding friendly first-name terms and sharing all joys and hardships. Humor was as important as ammunition. In conclusion, while winter strategies differed, all crews sought a balance between technological innovation and human needs. In the final section, we'll consider the wider meaning of this experience and what it says to the present.